There are times in a woman's life when the healthiest choice is not to speak, but to remain silent. The paradox is that in silence, clarity emerges, not because the other person suddenly speaks louder, but because your withdrawal creates space for truth to surface. And here's the most honest, even brutal reality. When you stop reaching out to a man, you don't lose him. You allow him to lose himself. Many women have shared with me in consultations, "I feel like if I don't write, everything will end," and in a way, they're right. What they're holding on to is often not a true relationship, but an emotional momentum fueled by fear, routine, or the need for affection. They take a step back, pause, and what begins as a short break turns into a mirror reflecting the most uncomfortable question: what if I never reach out again? This is not a strategy or a manipulation. It is an act of emotional dignity and at the same time, a risk. Because this silence, born from self-preservation, may confirm your deepest fear, that he won't return, that he won't seek you, that he may not even notice your absence. And here begins the cruel paradox. The man who once replied half-heartedly now stops replying altogether. The one who already seemed distant simply vanishes. This indifference hurts more than an open goodbye, because there are no harsh words, no closure, only a blank page, and you waiting for someone else to write on it. Yet in that emptiness lies a revelation. Silence has a way of bringing hidden truths to light. A man does not remain in that emptiness by chance. His response to your silence reveals more about him than any conversation ever could. And when you resist the urge to break the silence first, you witness a truth that needs no embellishment. The real focus is not on his reaction, but on what you discover within yourself as you wait. Fear, anger, and hope swirl together, testing your emotional strength. But it is also an opportunity, a doorway to recognizing more honestly what you have truly experienced. At first, he doesn't notice your absence as strongly as you notice his. Not because you mean nothing to him, but because the male mind, especially in relationships carried mostly by you, tends to take the bond for granted. He doesn't examine it daily, doesn't test it. He assumes it will hold the way one presses a switch, expecting the light to turn on, without thinking of the power behind it. For many women, silence in communication quickly triggers anxiety. The phone feels heavier, every unanswered notification like a quiet betrayal. This is because they have been socially, emotionally, and culturally conditioned to maintain connections, to protect bonds, even when it causes pain. To stop reaching out is not just breaking contact, it is questioning identity. Who am I if I am not the one who holds things together? Meanwhile, he requires distance, sometimes hours, sometimes days. His focus moves through compartments: work, friends, routines, hobbies. The woman who was once his emotional constant has now become a silence, and humans, regardless of logic, are drawn to repetition. When a pattern shifts, the mind senses discomfort, a subtle unease like an itch without a clear source. That's when he begins searching for signs. Not of love, not yet. The first gestures are simple checks, the need to know you are still present. Not heroic, not deeply emotional, but small, casual signals. A short message. How are you? A story on social media that might seem directed at you but isn't confirmed. A song shared without explanation. A hesitant knock without real intention. To enter. Many women fall back at this stage because such gestures spark hope. Maybe he noticed, maybe he misses me. But what drives him is not longing. It is habit, it is ego, it is testing. He does not want to lose you completely, yet he is unsure if he truly wants to choose you either. What he seeks is the reassurance that the door is still slightly open. So you must ask yourself, am I willing to be tested, or am I waiting to be clearly chosen? The human brain, in its primal form, does not easily separate genuine affection from simple validation. But it recognizes one thing sharply: absence. When something that was always present suddenly disappears, the nervous system interprets it as a threat, not because love has ended, but because predictability has been disrupted. And the mind, no matter how logical, deeply resists uncertainty. In relationships where the woman has carried most of the effort, the calls, the messages, the small daily gestures of care, the man often becomes accustomed to receiving, not always out of selfishness, but because emotional roles are usually taken on without being spoken about. She gives, he responds; she holds on, he settles in. Until one day she stops. That silence, quiet yet powerful, doesn't crash like thunder. It lingers like a distant echo, unsettling and unclear. What happened? Is she all right? Did I do something wrong? These questions don't always arise from love, but from the loss of a reflection. Often, we're attached less to the person themselves than to what they reflect back to us. If you were his mirror of validation, your absence leaves him face to face with himself. This is when one of the most common yet misunderstood reactions occurs. The man reappears, not with deep devotion, but with small gestures. His drive is not true connection with you, but connection with the feeling of being wanted. And though it may seem romantic on the surface, it is not love. It is a search for reassurance, a way of asking, do I still have you? Not because I love you, but because I can't bear the thought that you may no longer love me. The problem is that many women mistake this movement for change. They believe a small gesture signals renewed interest, that a brief hello is the start of reconnection. But it isn't. It is only a check, like someone passing by an old house they once lived in, just to see if a light still shines in the window. He has no intention of returning. He only wants to know if he would still be welcomed. For those who have already faced disappointment, the difference is clear. The energy with which someone approaches you says more than their words. Some visits want to stay. Others simply remind you they were once there. Eventually, there comes a point where there is no more space for testing. Silence becomes definitive. It forces the other person to decide. And here, something important is revealed. When the man can no longer rely on your messages, your attention, your emotional presence, he reaches a threshold. Some cross it with clarity and commitment. Others quietly step away. But no one can remain in the doorway forever. If there is no genuine bond, if you only filled a gap, provided companionship, distraction, or comfort that kept him from facing his own emptiness, then he will withdraw. Not with conflict, not with farewell, but gradually, fading like someone who leaves before being asked to stay. And as painful as it feels, in truth, it spares you from a heavier burden, continuing to invest in someone who never intended to build anything lasting with you. What we often mistake for coldness is simply emotional withdrawal. No harsh words, no blame, no dramatic ending, yet even silence carries a message. It says, I am not willing to fight for this. And you deserve to hear that, even if it arrives through absence. There are, however, men who respond to silence differently. Instead of withdrawing, they begin to reflect. Not instantly, because emotional awareness rarely comes at first, but gradually, when the calls stop, when the messages fade, something begins to ache. If that ache is genuine, it doesn't turn into accusations or manipulation. It turns into searching. The contrast is clear. No more vague messages or meaningless distractions. Instead, there are complete words, clear intentions, and tangible actions. Because when a man truly recognizes his absence, he doesn't try to deny it. He doesn't argue against your silence. He accepts it. And in that acceptance lies maturity, the that surfaces only when ego no longer controls the conversation. It isn't silence that punishes him. It's silence that confronts him with himself. It strips away routine and forces him to face what he nearly lost. And if he truly values you, he won't just reach out, he'll show up. With words, with actions, and with vulnerability. When a man disappears in response to your silence, the most painful truth isn't his absence. It's the confirmation that you were the only one who was truly present. Missing. What once existed is one thing. Realizing there was never anything real to hold on to, that it was only your one-sided efforts, hurts in a deeper way. You gave, hoping he would one day meet you halfway. But he didn't then, and he still doesn't. Not because you lack worth, not because you don't matter, but because some men are emotionally unavailable, not even to themselves. For them, connection is functional, not emotional. They are comfortable as long as they are receiving, as long as no depth is required. But when balance is needed, when presence and effort are demanded, their response is silence. The silence of someone who will not return. And then comes the cruelest thought, the one that lingers. If I had kept writing, he would still be here. And yes, maybe he would. But at what cost? At the expense of your emotional dignity, your endless effort, your constant need to prove your value. That would not be a relationship. It would be a one-sided performance of love. Accepting that someone does not want to stay is one of the deepest acts of self-love, because it means letting go of an illusion that comforted you but was never real. It means looking in the mirror without excuses, without searching for reasons, without convincing yourself it was wrong timing or that you should have acted differently. Sometimes the truth is simple. The other person does not have the emotional capacity to love you as you deserve, and that is not your fault. In such moments, silence becomes a clarifier. It doesn't create distance, it reveals that the distance was already there. And by resisting the urge to save what is already dissolving, you allow that truth to set you free. Even the pain of losing something real is easier to endure than the confusion of holding on to something that only existed in your imagination. And if you ever ask yourself, why didn't he come back? Why didn't he fight for me? Remember this: anyone who does not return without being asked was never truly committed to staying. There are men who experience your silence as a genuine loss. They are not satisfied with vague gestures. They don't send cryptic messages, hidden signals in stories, or quick reactions just to ease their own discomfort. Instead, they acknowledge their absence and respond directly, without excuses, without delays, and without waiting for you to make the first move. This is not about last-minute romance or desperate attempts to win you back. It's about an honest, often painful realization that they allowed something valuable to slip away. Not because you left, but because they were never truly present when you still were. And when this awareness finally sets in, the silence that once felt threatening transforms into an opportunity for healing. The difference is clear. He does not try to win you over with flattering words or empty explanations. He shows up with real actions, a message not seeking pity, but taking responsibility. I know I was distant. I don't want to lose you, with calls that don't try to erase the silence, but instead respect it, with words that say, we can talk whenever you're ready, but I need to express what I feel, with proposals that aren't vague promises but clear decisions. I want us to meet and truly talk. This kind of response is rare. It requires an emotional maturity that not everyone possesses. It doesn't come from a wounded ego, but from the awareness of what is truly at stake. It does not look for instant reassurance. It recognizes that your withdrawal had meaning. Coming back to you does not erase the past. It attempts to rebuild from another starting point. Yet even in these moments, even when gestures feel genuine, clarity is essential, because not every apology carries the weight of commitment. Not every return reflects the ability to stay. So pause before you respond, before the emotion of reunion sweeps you away. Ask yourself, is this step driven by fear of losing me or by a sincere wish to be with me? The difference is profound. One calms his own fear, while the other accepts responsibility for a shared bond. And you, having lived long enough to recognize the difference between empty actions and true devotion, deserve this clarity. Not out of excessive demands, but because you have learned, perhaps painfully, that love without commitment is only an illusion. This is why silence, when genuine, does not manipulate. It frees, not instantly, not without pain, but eventually. It does, because by interrupting the endless cycle of validation, explanations, and emotional caretaking, silence creates what psychology calls inner space. And this space is not filled with distractions, ready-made answers, or comforting illusions. It fills with what truly exists once the noise subsides. In relationships, silence functions like a darkened room. At first, it unsettles you. You see nothing, but over time your vision adjusts and you begin to notice shapes, nuances, and truths once hidden. He too faces this emotional darkness, and his reaction depends on his attachment style, secure, anxious, or avoidant. An avoidant man, for example, may interpret your silence as justification for his withdrawal. She stepped away, so continuing no longer makes sense. But this conclusion is not insight, it is defense. The relationship revealed an intimacy he could not manage, and instead of risking vulnerability, he retreats, not because he feels nothing, but because he does not know how to feel safely. A man with a secure attachment, however, even if once distracted, can take your silence as a chance for honest reflection. He does not hide in pride or search for blame. Instead, he asks himself, where was I while she was still present? And from that question grows a different kind of connection, less impulsive, more intentional, more open to healing without expecting you to rescue him. Meanwhile, you too undergo this process. Silence is not a waiting game. It is fertile ground for your own emotional awakening. As he confronts himself, you confront yourself. You begin to see whether you truly miss the person or only the routine. Whether what hurts is the absence of real love or the loss of an idealized image, and it is within this shared clarity, his and yours, that truth emerges. Not a comfortable truth, not immediate or always hopeful, but a mature one. A truth not shouted or demanded, but quietly recognized when two people finally meet each other's eyes. Picture Sophie. She had been seeing Daniel for 3 months. Nothing serious, at least not on the surface, but she sensed something building. Not a deep surge of love, but a quiet hope. She was the one sending messages, suggesting plans, noticing small details. He responded, but with little energy, like someone appreciative without truly engaged. Then one day, she stopped. No more texts, no more effort, no more reaching out. 4 days passed. Daniel sent a short hello without waiting for much. She answered politely, but didn't return to her old rhythm. He didn't insist. The conversation slowed, faded, and a silence replaced what had only been sustained by her effort. There was no fight, no ending scene, only the truth left standing. If she did not reach out, he did not move. This kind of ending, though painful, carries a harsh clarity. There are no illusions. Daniel did not disappear out of cruelty or punishment. He simply never intended more. He wasn't unkind or malicious, just available for the surface level. And when Sophie removed her constant push, the reality revealed itself without confrontation. Since the bond wasn't mutual, it dissolved naturally. Now picture Lena in a different stage of life. She had been with Ryan for almost a year. He wasn't indifferent, but lately distracted, too absorbed in himself, barely present. She felt lonely, even when he was beside her, so she made a decision. 1 week of silence, not as punishment, but as a pause to listen to her own pain without distraction. On the 3rd day, Ryan reached out, not with shallow texts, but with a call and a voice message. He said he had been reflecting. He didn't sound desperate, but genuine. On the 5th day, he came to her, not with excuses, but with flowers and eyes that didn't avoid hers. He said, "I know I've pulled away. I didn't see it before, but I'm here now. If you want to talk, I want to listen." No promises, no grand declarations, but something was different. The intention to repair, not out of fear of losing her, but because her absence confronted him with a void he could no longer ignore. These 2 stories are neither good nor bad. It isn't about condemning Daniel or idealizing Ryan. It's about what silence reveals. Silence doesn't always bring someone back, but it always shows who they truly are in the story. Accepting their response, whatever it may be, requires a quiet kind of courage. Not pride, not forced indifference, but the courage of a heart that knows its limits without shutting down its sensitivity. Because whether he disappears or returns with honesty, one truth remains. You cannot control what someone feels. You can only decide what you are willing to carry. If his answer is silence, then your task is not to treat it as a reflection of your worth. His absence does not define your value or your capacity to love. It only mirrors his own emotional limits. He didn't return because he didn't want to, couldn't, or didn't know how. In any case, what remains for you is not guilt, but closure. Closure doesn't always come through words. It takes form when you stop insisting on something that was never freely offered. That is difficult, of course, because when there's no farewell, the mind creates stories to find logic in the emptiness. But love does not need to explain what never existed. It only asks you to stop waiting for what has already shown itself. Through absence, not as resignation, but as emotional freedom. If, however, the response is genuine, if he comes back with intention, with actions, with vulnerability, then the task is different. Not to leap blindly into the relationship, not to see his return as some dramatic proof of love, but to observe, to feel, to notice if his actions truly support his words, not as punishment, but as respect for yourself. Even a man who returns can still fail, not because he doesn't care, but because he hasn't yet done the inner work needed to truly remain. You are not here to repeat cycles. You are here to build something different. A space where silence is no longer threatening, but useful, where you no longer fear what happens if you are not the one to always reach out first. Because the one who wants to stay will make the effort, and the one who does not will always find an excuse. His response is not the real question. The real question is, how do you respond to this truth? Do you deny yourself because he did not give back? Do you betray yourself out of fear of losing him again? Or do you stand firm, not with bitterness, but with clarity, holding on to what you now know you deserve? Silence does not mean disappearing. Silence does not mean punishing. Silence, when chosen by a soul tired of forcing, is a return to self. It is no longer about knocking on doors that will not open. It is letting go of the rope, not from lack of care, but because it hurts too much to keep pulling alone. You have lived long enough to know not everything that begins with hope ends in reciprocity. And that does not make you foolish. It makes you human. Because love, when born from a true desire to share life, is not a tactic. It is devotion. Yet, devotion without response eventually turns into exhaustion. Sometimes, in order to find yourself again, you must stop chasing the other. Exactly in the silence you once feared, you uncover a truth that does not shout, but weighs heavy. The one who truly stays not because you call, not because you beg, but because he feels it, chooses it, and is ready. And if that does not, happen, you are not meant to become the emotional beggar for what never arrives. Love is not blind. It is clear. It sees what is missing. It sees what hurts. It sees what does not change. And even in pain, it learns. It learns to let go without drama. It learns to value absence as a mirror of truth. It learns not to return at the first small sign of attention, because not every message is a bridge. Sometimes it is only a signpost. It shows where you stand, but it takes you nowhere. This journey is not a formula. There are no guarantees or manuals, but there is one certainty. You have survived worse than this silence. And if you are here now, finally listening to yourself, it is because part of you has grown weary of pressing where no echo comes back. And in that weariness, there is wisdom. Perhaps you still do not know what to do. Perhaps you are still waiting for an answer that does not arrive. Perhaps you are still reading into gestures that remain unclear, and that is fine. Healing never happens in haste. But there is one promise you can make to yourself from this day forward. You will no longer lose yourself just to avoid losing someone else. Because true love is not proven by how much you insist, but by how you carry yourself when no answer comes. And in that holding, when everything inside you shakes, there lies a dignity no one can ever take away.